This week in Post, 3 questions and hopefully 3 answers. Hey everyone, I'm Scott Davenport. Welcome to In Post. Thanks for joining me today. Today is a Q&A episode. You've been sending in photo questions and it's been great. Keep them coming. I wanted to take a few of them, put them together in a video. I thought these might be quite applicable to a variety of you out there and help demystify 1 or 2 things about post-processing. And if you got questions, please send them my way. I'd love to hear from you. I usually am able to turn an answer around to you in a couple of days. And then you might even see your question featured on a future In Post video, which I'm sure is a really major feather in your cap. But anyway, let's get to the first question. First question's from Tom, and he asks, what are all these .on1 files that keep showing up on my computer? Okay, so a little context why these were showing up and Tom was actually seeing them is he was working on his desktop. So he had his photos on his desktop and bring them into ON1 doing some editing. And these additional ON1 files started showing up. So let's first explain what's going on here. In Photo Raw, in your Preferences, under the Files tab, we have Save ON1 Sidecar Files. It's an option. I believe it's off by default. I always turn it on. But a sidecar file contains information about the non-destructive edits you're doing. It's like the instructions you're giving ON1 to apply things to your photo. The reason I like to have the sidecar file is because if anything ever happened to the internal database that ON1 is maintaining, that I have a backup of what I've changed for my photo. Or I can take both my raw and my sidecar file and move them to another computer, and I have all my edits with me. So it's a nice way to have those edits follow along with your raw file. Now, if you're working and you start seeing these ON1 files show up, it can be a little confusing. So I have one file up on my desktop. If I go over to the desktop area, suddenly I now have a .on1 file. Well, what just happened? Well, Browse looked at the photo, and one of the things that Browse will do is by default add lens corrections, because most of the time, particularly a wide angle guy like me, it adds lens corrections automatically. But just the fact that ON1 looked at the file and said, oh, it's there, I'm going to know about it, I have that checkbox turned on, it put this .on1 file next to it. If you're not working in a folder that you're looking at and watching all the time, you don't really see these things. But if it's on your desktop, they start to show up. So that's what this file is. Now, is there any harm in deleting it? Well, not entirely, not really. I mean, a copy of all your adjustments are kept by the ON1 application. And if you've exported the photo to a JPEG or some other format, you've baked in all of your changes, well, then you don't really need this anyway. They take up very little space. I mean, maybe a kilobyte each. So I just leave them around. But if you're working on your desktop, well, then it can kind of get crowded. So that part, I'll leave up to you as how you want to deal with the .on1 files. But I tend to just leave them around, let them stay there, and it acts as a kind of a fallback backup for any of the non-destructive changes that I've made. Next question was from Harris, and he asked about masks and moving them between ON1 and Photoshop, and can you do this? So the short version is yes, you can, but only from the Layers module in ON1. That's really what understands the layers and stacks of PSD files. So if you're making masks in effects or local adjustments, those aren't going to translate. But if you're making masks in layers, they will. So you can do some type of masking in ON1 and then use that PSD file in Photoshop and see those particular layer masks as well as other layers. But you won't be able to do that from effects. And if you wanted to do that kind of workflow, sometimes people want to use the masking tools that are in ON1 and then further work on their photo in Photoshop. What you can't do is you can't send a photo from Photoshop into Layers. They just don't have a plugin for that. You have to save it out to something else and then open it up in Photoshop. And I think the logic behind that is you're in Photoshop, which is already a layering package. So why would I want to send this to another layering package? I don't have any other detailed information on it, then that's my instinct as to why that restriction's there. But so yes, Harris, you can have masks move back and forth between Photoshop and ON1 only from layers. Last question is from Bruce, and he asked something about the transform tool in Lightroom when we're doing perspective correction. Does it matter where you draw the guidelines? And I thought the best way to look at that is just look at an example. So I've got a shot here of a pier. It's at wide angle, and so these guys are kind of tilted. And I have 3 different virtual copies of it. And so, this is our original. This will be copy 1. This will be copy 2. And so what we're going to do is just go into the transform tool, and we'll use guided. And let's say our first time we're going to draw a line on this pier piling that is close to us. So we'll draw 1 there and then 1 on the other side of it. So let's get close on that, and right about there is pretty good. Okay, so we got that one. Okay, that was probably me not doing such a great job. It really straightened this one up. But let's go ahead and now look at our second virtual copy, and maybe I'll do that guided transform out on this particular piling. So we'll do it here and on the other side here. Something like that. Doesn't look like I got that one good enough. There we go. Okay, and so that's certainly looking very different. Let's go to our third one. Let's space them out a little bit. So let's say I wanted to get this piling to be straight, as well as maybe this one here, and see if we get any difference in balance between these two. And it got us that there. So this was our first experiment where we were kind of close to the edge there, and so things shifted quite interestingly. Here's our second one, and here's our third one. So definitely there is a difference, and I guess it will just take some level of experimentation to decide which one makes the most sense for your particular scene. So Bruce, that's a really good question, and I hadn't thought of this before, but there's certainly a difference in where you draw those lines. And I was pretty quick on this too, so I'll bet there's also a difference of how precise you are when you draw those guidelines. Take a little more time than I did in this video in getting those guidelines correct. That'll do it for this week's In Post. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you did, let me know somehow. Contact me through my website. Send in more questions. It's great to hear from folks. I want to know what's on your mind. And I say it again and again, week after week. I promise you, your questions are more valuable than you can imagine. I'm hopefully giving you an answer that'll help you out. And I can promise and guarantee that your questions are making me a better photographer as well. That's the whole point. We get better together. Well, until next time, my name's Scott Davenport, and happy shooting.